Hi, everybody. My name is Dolores Greenawalt, and I am a recent graduate here from St. John's University. I got my doctorate in literacy, and so I'm here today to talk a little bit about my research and what I did with my study. First things first, a little bit about myself. Obviously, I got my PhD from St. John's. I got my master's degree in English from National University out in California, and then my bachelor's degree in journalism and mass comm is from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I teach at several different universities here in Milwaukee, including the Milwaukee School of Engineering and their humanities department, and at Carroll University, which is in Waukesha, a suburb of Milwaukee. I teach English, and I'm also the reading and writing lab facilitator, and that's where the research took place. As you can see, I've done a couple of national presentations, and then also presentations here in Wisconsin, all prevalent to the classroom English, the value of student-teacher relationships. It is pretty important to me. I think that the easiest way to make students succeed is to build upon these relationships, make them feel at home, make them feel like they have somewhere to go, and I like being that person. Privately, English is not my first language. It's actually my second language. Croatian is my first language. I did not learn English until I went to school. I grew up teaching English because I taught my mom how to speak English, write, read. So as I learned it, I also came home and I was able to teach it. So teaching is truly kind of a natural thing for me to evolve into. A little bit about the study. So the purpose of this study was to build on the literature, the little literature that there is, and I wanted to assess the relationship between participating in a reading and writing lab next to a developmental English class, and I wanted to analyze the different levels of self-perceived comprehension and confidence in students who did both. And the goal or the intent was to learn more about their self-perceived comprehension and their confidence, and if attending the lab increased these. So, first things first, we have to define what a writing lab is and what a reading and writing lab is. The reading and writing lab is a lab that I created about 2 years ago. It is faculty-led. I am the one that runs it, so there's a lot of differences just with that. It's not peer-reviewed or peer-to-peer like typical writing labs that you can find across a lot of universities in the United States. My lab is open hours for drop-in, so I'm open a set amount of hours throughout the week, and then students can drop in whenever they would like. While writing labs traditionally are focused on one assignment, usually a paper. There's a variety of different activities that students can do in my lab, and a lot of times with the writing lab, it's just limited activities such as going over your paper. In the reading and writing lab, because there's other individuals in there, they can work individually or they can choose to work in a group. And then a typical writing lab, you can't always just drop in. So some of the research questions that I was thinking about when I did this was my primary one was what makes a reading and writing lab useful and effective when attending concurrently with a developmental English class. The first quantitative question that I had was, does attending this faculty-led reading and writing lab increase a student's confidence from the beginning of the semester to the end? And it was hypothesized that it would increase the confidence. The second quantitative question was, does attending a reading and writing lab next to a developmental English class increase a student's self-perceived comprehension from the beginning of the semester to the end? Again, that was also hypothesized that it would. My qualitative questions included how, if at all, does the reading and writing lab help increase a student's confidence, and how, if at all, does a reading and writing lab increase students' self-perceived comprehension? So a couple of details about my study. One, the research design. It was a convergent mixed methods. It took place at a less than 5,000 student sized university in the Midwest. It's a 4-year campus. It was broken up into 2 identical surveys. They took one at the beginning of the semester and one at the end of the semester. And then also there was an interview portion for those who attended the lab. My participants were freshman college students. They were taking the developmental English class in the fall of 2020. Their age range was between 18 and 20, and a lot of them were labeled as a non-traditional population, meaning that they spoke one or more languages, they were immigrants, or they were also the first in their family or their community to go to college. Quantitative analysis was done through SPSS. I took a look at low, medium, and high users of the lab. And then qualitative participated in semi-structured 15 to 30-minute interviews. The 2 themes that really stuck out were student-structured activities and lab attendance. So when I say student-structured activities, I meant individual and group learning. Individual was centered around self-perceived comprehension, and the group learning was centered around confidence. The self-perceived comprehension dealt with quiet reading, quiet writing, focusing on material. And then those confidence ones dealt more with the group reading, group writing, and moving from one activity to the other. Lab attendance was the other major theme, and that was broken down into lab habits. So the more time that they came to the lab, the more habits that they created. One-on-one time with the instructor, so asking me any sort of questions that they might have had, and then feeling comfortable. Obviously, the more the students attended lab, the more comfortable that they felt attending, which increased their attendance. So there were 3 different levels of lab users. We had low lab users who came 1 to 2 times, medium lab users who came 3 to 7 times, and then high lab users who came at least 8 times or more throughout the semester. And if we take a look at the confidence, we can see that it really soared with those high lab users. In the beginning of the semester, the mean was 3.06, and it jumped to 4.38 out of a 5 scale. And then the lowest amount of increase that we saw was in medium lab users, which is really interesting. So what are some common habits of those high lab users to increase their confidence rates, which meant a lot of group activities? They visited at least 8 times in the semester. Their average visit was 75 minutes. They moved around from one activity to the other. They were able to go in depth with each of these activities because they were there for 75 minutes. They talked to others about things that were going on in the classroom, and everyday things. So they became comfortable. They wanted to attend. The lab became a place for them to study. It honestly became a place for them to hang out. So we started to see this kind of community effect happening within the lab. Medium lab users, it was interesting because they visited at least 3 to 7 times throughout the semester. They had a lot of the same habits as high lab users, so they really wanted to move around from one activity to the other. And they did talk to other users in the lab. They felt comfortable, but they were there to get stuff done. So their average visit time was 33 minutes, which meant that they were not able to go into as much depth in their activities as those higher users and the ones who stayed a little bit longer. So they were super comfortable talking to me. They were comfortable talking to each other, but they just didn't have the time in the lab to be able to successfully create these different habits and these different activities. Then we have the low lab users, and they only came 1 to 2 times, but they also visited for about 75 minutes at a time. So what did they do different? They wrote papers and assignments the longest. That's really what they spent their time. It was more individual. They were focused on an assignment. They came in to work on their writing. Um, and that's really what they spent the majority of their time on. It was definitely more of a one-on-one or kind of individual time. If we take a look at the self-perceived comprehension, again, we see that the biggest rise was from high lab users from the beginning of the semester to the end. And then the second highest rate that increased was the low lab users. And again, the middle lab users were the smallest increase. So what were some of the habits of the high lab users? Well, they focused on building habits. They came and they started developing habits, and they also learned which strategies were working the best for them. So if they learned that it really worked out well when they talked to other group members and then they drifted off into individual reading, that's what they did. You could see as they became more comfortable in the lab and learning different strategies that they would feel more comfortable working alone after they had these group discussions about their readings and their assignments. Lab time really became a time for them to focus on schoolwork. Once they got the hang of it and they figured out what worked for them, they were excited to come to the lab because they wanted this place to study and they still felt comfortable because there were others around, and it wasn't necessarily as quiet as the library. Medium users, they didn't really focus on creating good habits and they didn't go into depth. And a lot of times is because they came in, they wanted to work on papers, they wanted to read, but because their visits were so short, they just did not have the time to be able to create good habits. They didn't have the time to work on the different types of material that they needed to. Then the low lab users, they did again a lot of independent writing. They didn't necessarily form this community with other members because they came in for only 1 or 2 times and they really wanted to better their writing. And then they were not necessarily committed to the lab. They came in, they had specific questions. Once those questions were answered, they just kind of moved on and left, didn't necessarily come back. So a lot of the key findings from this study, one, attendance is key. So attending the lab multiple times and for longer periods found to be the greatest success. Not only was it important to attend lab frequently, it was also important to stay there. Staying there for an hour, hour and a half gave you the ability to focus on these combination of activities. The next key finding that included both peer work, individual work, group discussions, just talking to the instructor, but there was a habit. You saw them participating in all of the activities. They also had the time to participate in the activities because they were there for longer periods. So they created habits. This working independently, we saw that there was a highest increase in self-comprehension, but in order to work independently, they relied on those group conversations to get them to that place. And then also instructor time. So spending time with the instructor, asking questions. Students heard other students asking questions, which helped them develop further questions. And it was really important to see that connection between them. What does it all mean? If we break it up into medium lab, low lab, and high lab users, we can see that medium lab users could have benefited by attending a longer length of time, and perhaps they would have had the higher confidence rates, because really the only difference between the low lab and high lab users was the amount of visits, but they both visited for about the same length of time. Low lab users, though, could attend more frequently and they could have dove deeper into more than just one assignment. Had they came for a couple of assignments, they maybe would have created more habits and felt more comfortable where they wanted to come to the lab because of this community that they were building. High lab users were the most successful, and the assumption is that, or it's hypothesized that it's because of their attendance and their length and time in the lab. When they came for multiple things, and they were learning throughout the semester which strategies really stuck with them the most. We saw that complemented in the interviews. In the interviews, they talked about how they were able to come, and because it wasn't a class, they didn't necessarily feel judged, but they still saw their classmates there. And they also saw other classmates who were in different types of classes, and they were able to talk about all of these classes as a whole. That helped them learn what maybe their classmates, what kind of study strategies they were doing, what they needed to do. They were able to try those out, and they had the time to do that. Low lab users did create a couple of strategies, but it was really just focused around the writing, and they used the lab as this Q&A section with the instructor. So they missed out on that piece of talking to their classmates and being able to really kind of form that bond that they might be able to take elsewhere into the classroom. And then again, medium lab users, they did frequent more often, but when they were in there, because they were in there for such a short amount of time, they weren't necessarily able to connect with the activities that they were doing. So they would try to cram 2 activities in 30 minutes rather than focus on the one activity that could help them be most successful. So future implications, I think that there's an opportunity to think about making the lab a requirement for students, for those who might be traditionally underserved, and taking a look at their ACT or SAT scores, English grades, and saying, okay, maybe that you take this with your regular English class, and by doing that, students could create this pattern where they came to the lab 1 or 2 times a week. And then within that pattern, they would begin to form those habits and really work on the things that they needed to work on. Also, the idea of eliminating the developmental classes, those non-credit classes that really can hurt students who are taking financial aid, and instead making a faculty-led reading and writing lab a co-requisite to a typical English freshman class. It would be interesting to do studies to see how it would work when students can come to the lab voluntarily versus when they are required to come to the lab a certain amount of times, or they're required to attend a lab in addition to the class. So the survey was, it was a lot of fun to do. Those interviews really helped kind of answer some more of the actual survey questions. And it was fun to see the increase in the rates. It would be interesting to do another survey, perhaps at more universities, at bigger universities, to see if we would find the exact same answers or if we would have to kind of change things around and see what results we would get depending on size of the university and the different types of students who take those developmental classes. If anyone wants to add or talk about this, I would love to do that. You can feel free to reach me. You can email me. You can also contact me through the university. So I hope to talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye.